Mid-Atlantic, November 1942. Night presses down like a lid on the ocean, swallowing every horizon. The wind is sharp, the waves restless, and the sky carries no moon. Only a heavy blanket of cloud drifting low over the convoy lanes. A German Type 7 U-boat cuts silently across the surface, its diesel engines humming softly beneath the roar of the sea. The captain stands atop the conning tower, scanning the darkness with a pair of salt-stained binoculars. This should be their hour. This should be their advantage. For 3 years, night had been the German hunter's shield. But tonight something feels wrong. The escort ships are too precise. Their turns too deliberate. Their search patterns too tight, as if an unseen hand guides them. Minutes later, the first Allied destroyer materializes from the dark. Not by chance, but as if it knew exactly where the U-boat would be. A spotlight snaps open, slicing across the waves. Depth charges follow, falling in a pattern far too accurate to be luck. The captain grips the rail, unable to understand how they were found so easily, in a night so black no human eye should see anything. And that unsettling realization would lead directly into the larger story. How American radar quietly rewrote the balance of the war at sea. In the first years of the Second World War, the Atlantic Ocean became a vast battlefield without borders. From the icy waters of Greenland to the warm currents near the Caribbean, thousands of merchant ships attempted to bring food, steel, oil, and weapons to Britain, a nation standing almost alone after the fall of Western Europe. Every ton of cargo mattered. Every convoy was a lifeline, and waiting for them, hidden beneath the waves, were the U-boats. When Germany unleashed its submarine fleet in 1939, the Kriegsmarine understood that they could not match the Royal Navy ship for ship. Instead, they sought to strangle Britain by cutting off its supply routes. The U-boat became their answer, stealthy, lethal, and in the early war, terrifyingly effective. Operating in loose groups known as wolf packs, German submarines prowled the shipping lanes, attacking convoys under the cover of darkness. At night, they surfaced, blending into the darkness, often closing to point-blank range before firing. Through 1941 and into 1942, the numbers were alarming. Merchant ships were sunk faster than Allied shipyards could replace them. Churchill himself admitted that the U-boat threat was the only danger that truly frightened him. Without supplies, Britain would starve, industry would collapse, and any hope of holding out would vanish. Despite the Allies' growing escort fleet, early detection methods remained painfully limited. Lookouts, even the most experienced, could only see so far. Hydrophones struggled in rough seas. Early sonar, known then as ASTIC, worked only when the escort ships were already close enough to the submarine to nearly guarantee an attack. At night, a surfaced U-boat was almost invisible, revealing itself only by the faint silhouette of its tower or the flicker of exhaust as it throttled forward. Germany understood this well. Their night surface attacks were designed around a simple principle. Darkness was the U-boat's ally. If they could strike before detection, they held the advantage. And for the first years of the war, they did. When the United States entered the conflict in December 1941, the situation became even more complicated. American coastal waters were poorly defended, shipping often sailed independently, and lighthouses remained illuminated. U-boat captains referred to the early months of 1942 along the American coast as the second happy time. Tankers burned off Cape Hatteras, freighters went down within sight of shore, and German commanders believed their technological and tactical edge was secure. But beneath the chaos and early American vulnerability, something else was happening, quietly, steadily, and far from the front line. The United States Navy, working with British scientific teams, was advancing a technology still in its infancy: radio detection and ranging, soon known simply as radar. In the early months of 1942, this new technology was not yet widespread, nor was it fully understood. Many Allied officers still trusted traditional lookout procedures, believing human eyes were more dependable in the unpredictable conditions at sea. But in laboratories across America and deep inside naval development centers, engineers were refining radar sets that could see what no lookout could, targets hidden in fog, rain, or total darkness. On the German side, few imagined such rapid progress. The Kriegsmarine leadership believed radar was useful on land or on aircraft, but unreliable on the shifting seas of the Atlantic. Their doctrine still centered on stealth, surprise, and the darkness of night. They were confident that the U-boat, small, silent, and nearly invisible, could remain undetected long enough to strike. But as 1942 unfolded, the ocean began to change. Convoys were escorted by American destroyers equipped with newer radar sets. Aircraft patrolling the mid-Atlantic slowly adopted radar, capable of penetrating even the worst weather. And without realizing it, German captains sailing through ink-black nights were beginning to face an opponent who no longer relied on the human eye. An opponent who could detect a submarine long before the submarine detected them. And this slow but revolutionary shift forms the foundation of the next phase of the story, one where German confidence would collide with American technological momentum. By early 1942, German commanders still viewed the Atlantic as a battlefield shaped primarily by tactics, training, and nerve. Technology, especially advanced detection technology, was not something they feared. For years, German naval officers believed that the Allies lacked the scientific depth and industrial agility to field anything that could truly threaten the U-boat at long range or in poor visibility. That assumption would soon prove costly. The Kriegsmarine intelligence branch, the B-Dienst, had correctly assessed improvements in Allied sonar, but their reports downplayed developments in electromagnetic detection. Some senior officers believed radar was bulky, inconsistent at sea, or so limited in range that it could not reliably guide ships in combat. Others assumed that if radar ever became practical, Germany's own laboratories, already working on long-wave detection receivers, would detect it first. German U-boat captains sailed with this confidence. To them, the Atlantic's greatest ally was the night. In moonless darkness, a surface submarine presented only a faint silhouette, easy to miss, even at close range. Fog banks, rain squalls, and shifting ocean currents all serve as natural camouflage. A well-trained crew, a disciplined bridge watch, and a captain skilled in night maneuvering could approach a convoy undetected, fire a spread of torpedoes, and disappear before the escorts realized what had happened. But across the ocean, Allied scientists were cracking a series of problems that had long hindered naval radar. Earlier sets like the CXAM and SC were already in use, but their long wavelengths made them less precise. What changed everything was the cavity magnetron, a British invention shared with the United States through the TISR mission. It allowed radar to operate on shorter wavelengths, particularly the 10-centimeter band, producing sharper resolution and greater range. This revolution arrived in the form of the SG radar, a compact, powerful system capable of detecting a submarine's conning tower at several miles, even in total darkness. It could sweep the sea with a clarity no human lookout could match. Destroyers equipped with SG radar no longer needed moonlight or luck to find a U-boat. They needed only a functioning antenna and a skilled operator. At first, the Germans had no idea this capability existed. Reports began filtering in from U-boat captains who returned from patrols confused by new Allied behaviors. Escorts turned sharply toward them without any visual cues. Aircraft appeared out of cloud cover with uncanny precision. Depth charge attacks were launched against U-boats that believed they were completely hidden. Some commanders speculated that the Allies had developed better hydrophones. Others believed there were more escort ships at sea than intelligence had reported. A few suspected radar, but their concerns were often dismissed. Meanwhile, American naval aviation took the next step. Long-range patrol aircraft, Catalinas, Liberators, and later Avengers, were equipped with airborne radar that transformed the mid-ocean gap from a safe haven into a hunting ground. Radar allowed aircraft to locate U-boats before they could submerge, forcing them into reactive dives that drained batteries and limited patrol endurance. Still, the true extent of radar's effectiveness remained hidden from German intelligence. Early German radar detectors, like the Metox receiver, only detected long-wave Allied radar sets. U-boat crews believed Metox picked up all enemy radar. In reality, it was blind to the new centimeter band systems, meaning U-boats sailing confidently on the surface at night were often being tracked by shipborne SG radar without realizing it. This false sense of security shaped a dangerous pattern. German submarines continued surfacing at night, believing themselves invisible, while Allied destroyers and aircraft quietly closed the distance. By late 1942, a subtle but undeniable shift had begun. Convoys that previously suffered devastating losses now survived encounters that should have been disastrous. Escorts began pushing U-boats away before attacks could even begin. And in many cases, German captains reported being ambushed in the open ocean, a scenario that defied every principle of submarine warfare. These early signs were a warning, one the Kriegsmarine leadership struggled to interpret. Because behind the fog, the darkness, and the storm clouds, America had found a way to see. And those first glimpses would soon open into a much broader understanding of how radar would reshape the battle entirely. The transformation of the Atlantic War did not begin with a dramatic battle or a strategic revelation. It began inside laboratories, where engineers and physicists solved problems that most naval officers did not even realize existed. The key breakthrough was the cavity magnetron, a device small enough to fit in one hand, yet powerful enough to generate microwave frequencies that dramatically increased radar's resolution. Before this moment, radar sets were useful but blunt instruments, large, heavy, and limited by long wavelengths that blurred targets into indistinct echoes. With the magnetron, the Allies suddenly unlocked the ability to detect small objects at greater distances. The new 10-centimeter SG radar was compact enough to mount on destroyers, reliable in rough weather, and precise enough to distinguish between a wave crest and a submarine's conning tower. More importantly, it could detect a U-boat long before the submarine's watch crew had any chance of spotting an approaching escort visually. For the first time in naval history, darkness stopped being a barrier. Radar operators inside American ships watched glowing traces crawl across their screens, each one representing something on the surface. Sometimes a merchant ship, sometimes another escort, and sometimes the faint but unmistakable reflection of a U-boat that believed it was hidden. This quiet technological leap reshaped escort tactics almost overnight. Previously, captains relied heavily on visual sightings and sonar. Now, they could search proactively. Ships equipped with SG radar spread out in widening arcs, sweeping the ocean with synchronized patterns. Convoys no longer sailed blind. Radar allowed escorts to anticipate where a submarine might position itself and disrupt it before it closed in. What German captains thought was luck was, in truth, American ships using radar to pierce the night. For the men inside the U-boats, the change was felt long before it was understood. U-boat service had always been physically demanding and mentally exhausting, but it carried a sense of mastery. German crews were highly trained, disciplined, and intimately familiar with the sea's rhythms. They trusted the night. They trusted their ability to stay unseen. Many had survived multiple patrols under the belief that their instincts and experience were enough to outmaneuver Allied escorts. But in late 1942 and in 1943, a subtle fear took hold. Reports from returning patrols described the same pattern. Escorts reacted faster, maneuvered more accurately, and launched depth charge attacks with almost clinical precision. Some U-boat captains described being caught on the surface in conditions where visibility was nearly zero. Others recounted the strange sensation of escorts turning toward them just minutes after they surfaced, as though guided by an invisible hand. The bridge watch, the men responsible for spotting threats, grew increasingly anxious. Their eyes strained in the dark for any sign of danger, knowing that the slightest delay could be fatal. Yet time and again, Allied ships found them first. There was a growing realization among crews that something fundamental had shifted, but no one knew what it was. Inside the steel hulls, the psychological pressure mounted. The suddenness of attacks, the way escorts appeared from the darkness without warning, the sense of being hunted rather than hunting. These experiences eroded morale. U-boat crews were brave, but bravery offered no protection against an enemy that could see them before they could react. The sea had always been unpredictable, but now it felt hostile in a new way. The invisibility that once defined submarine warfare was slipping away. Radar didn't just improve detection, it rewrote naval tactics entirely. Before radar, escorts relied on tight formations and reactive maneuvers. Their job was to respond to attacks, chase torpedo wakes, search for oil slicks, and protect the convoy's most vulnerable ships. With radar, escorts became hunters rather than defenders. Convoys began forming multi-layered screens, with destroyers and corvettes assigned to aggressive patrols on the periphery. Radar-equipped ships could detect suspicious contacts miles away, investigate, and engage long before a U-boat reached firing position. Night surface attacks, the hallmark of Wolfpack doctrine, became increasingly risky. What had once been the U-boat's greatest strength now exposed them to early detection. Coordination between ships also improved dramatically. Radar allowed escorts to communicate precise positions, vectoring faster ships toward distant contacts. American destroyers, equipped with SG radar, often executed coordinated sweeps, forcing U-boats to dive prematurely and disrupting their attack patterns. The transformation expanded to the sky as well. Radar-equipped aircraft supported convoys by scanning wide swaths of ocean, identifying surface submarines long before the U-boats detected the aircraft. Pilots could home in on radar echoes hidden beneath cloud layers, catching submarines off guard during nocturnal battery charging routines. The combined effect of these changes was dramatic. Suddenly, a U-boat captain could do everything right: approach quietly, maintain discipline, navigate the darkness carefully, and still find himself ambushed. The tactical certainty the Germans once enjoyed began to dissolve. And this tactical shift, born from invisible waves traveling through the air, set the stage for even deeper consequences: technological countermeasures, leadership struggles, and the unraveling of long-held German assumptions. As the tide began to turn, the German high command struggled to interpret the mounting evidence. Returning U-boat crews insisted that Allied escorts had developed a new method of locating them, something faster, more precise, and more unsettling than anything encountered before. Yet nearly all technical evaluations inside the Kriegsmarine pointed toward the same conclusion. Radar was still primitive, unreliable at sea, and limited to long wavelengths easily detected by the German Metox receiver. Metox was introduced in mid-1942 and quickly became a symbol of reassurance. Its crude wooden antenna, nicknamed the Biscay Cross, extended from the bridge, capturing long-wave radar emissions used by older British sets. When a faint beeping filled the headphones, it warned the crew that aircraft or ships were sweeping the area. Many captains trusted it deeply. They believed Metox provided an invisible shield, enabling them to dive early and escape. But the comfort was an illusion. Metox could only pick up wavelengths above 1.5 meters, exactly the type of radar the Allies were abandoning. It was completely blind to the new 10-centimeter systems used by American destroyers and soon by British escorts as well. As a result, U-boats often surfaced at night, thinking the skies were clear, unaware that a destroyer several miles away had already detected them with SG radar and was silently closing in. German intelligence misinterpreted this silence. Because METOX detected nothing, officers assumed no radar was present. Believing they were safe, U-boat captains often stayed surfaced longer than they should have, increasing their vulnerability. Further confusion came from false theories circulating within the fleet. Some officers speculated that the Allies were using ultra-sensitive hydrophones. Others believed convoys carried more escorts than aerial reconnaissance had identified. A few even suggested that radar waves were emitted by the U-boat's own engines, a misunderstanding that led to suspicion rather than progress. By the time the Germans introduced improved detectors like Naxos and Tunis, capable of picking up shorter wavelengths, the damage was already done. They arrived late, worked inconsistently, and could not restore the shrinking safety window that once defined night operations. The intelligence gap had become fatal. Radar wasn't merely a tool. It was a secret advantage the Germans could not fully comprehend until its impact had already reshaped the Atlantic battlefield. Angle 5. Leadership blind spots. Leadership plays a decisive role in any war, and within the Kriegsmarine, one-man dominated U-boat strategy. Admiral Karl Donitz. Brilliant, dedicated, and relentless, Donitz believed wholeheartedly in the Wolfpack doctrine. He trusted his commanders, understood submarine warfare deeply, and believed the Allies' greatest weaknesses were structural: poor coordination, slow response times, and limited nighttime detection. For years, his assumptions had been correct. But from late 1942 onward, Donitz faced a problem he was slow to accept. The battlefield had fundamentally changed. Reports describing uncanny Allied detection were often attributed to coincidence, poor lookout discipline, or enemy luck. Donitz remained convinced that Allied technology had not advanced far enough to threaten his core strategy. His skepticism was understandable. The idea that ships could find U-boats in total darkness with such precision seemed almost impossible. Yet, while Donitz clung to past doctrine, Allied scientists and naval officers embraced rapid adaptation. American escort commanders shared radar observations, refined interception tactics, and integrated radar with sonar and HF/DF, radio direction finding. Their understanding of submarine behavior grew with each convoy. The Germans, in contrast, spent months debating whether radar was truly the cause of their losses. This delay allowed the Allies to sharpen their advantage. By the time the Kriegsmarine leadership acknowledged radar as the primary threat, U-boat losses had already spiked. Leadership hesitation became one of the silent factors behind the German collapse at sea. Technology moves fast. Wartime leadership, by necessity, must move faster. In this case, German command did not move fast enough. Angle 6. Psychological collapse of the Wolfpacks. Beyond tactics and technology, something more human and more fragile was changing. The U-boat arm had once been one of Germany's most elite forces, symbolizing daring, endurance, and precision. Crews who survived early patrols embodied a quiet confidence bordering on invincibility. They believed in their advantage, trusted their equipment, and viewed the Atlantic as familiar ground. But radar began eroding that confidence in subtle, devastating ways. When a U-boat captain could no longer predict when he might be spotted. When a night surfacing could lead to sudden explosions in the water. When escorts arrived with mathematical certainty rather than mere chance. The psychological foundation of the Wolfpacks began to crack. Veteran captains grew frustrated, unable to explain how Allied ships located them. Younger crews, less experienced, were struck by the alarming rate of sudden attacks. The stories shared inside cramped mess rooms shifted from triumph to survival. Technical uncertainty created rumor, and rumor created doubt. The fear of the unseen is one of the oldest fears in naval warfare. Radar weaponized that fear. Sailors began to feel hunted by something they could not detect, predict, or understand. The once disciplined night surface attacks became hurried and hesitant. Crews dove earlier, patrolled more cautiously, and sometimes abandoned attack opportunities out of fear of being discovered. This psychological shift did not happen overnight, but once it began, it accelerated. Morale weakened, confidence shook, and the wolf packs that once terrorized the Atlantic found themselves fighting an enemy who could see them without being seen. And this convergence of fear, leadership missteps, and technological surprise set the stage for the dramatic turning point that would soon arrive. By 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic reached a moment of profound transformation. What had once been a struggle defined by German initiative and Allied desperation was reversing with a speed that stunned both sides. The shift did not come from a single weapon or a single convoy. It emerged from an accumulation of technological maturity, tactical coherence, and a new kind of visibility at sea. Radar, once experimental and limited, had become operational, reliable, and deadly. The first unmistakable turning point arrived during the winter and spring of 1943, a period when several convoys encountered concentrated wolfpack attacks. In the past, such encounters meant catastrophic losses for the Allies. But now, something different happened. The escorts, many of them American, were ready. Convoy ONS 5, sailing westward in late April 1943, became a defining example. For days, German U-boats shadowed the slow-moving merchant ships, waiting for the weather to favor a coordinated night attack. Heavy fog, brutal winds, and low visibility created what should have been ideal conditions for the Germans. Rough seas often limited sonar effectiveness, and the darkness made visual detection almost impossible. U-boat commanders believed they had regained the advantage. They were wrong. Several escort vessels in ONS 5 carried SG radar, and despite the blinding fog, their operators began detecting contacts, faint but distinct echoes, on their screens. These radar returns came from U-boats maneuvering on the surface, unaware that the very mist concealing them from the human eye made them more visible to radar. One by one, destroyers and corvettes vectored toward the signals, forcing multiple U-boats to dive before they could even begin their approach. When the weather worsened, the Germans pressed for a massed attack, believing the escorts would be overwhelmed. But the radar-guided ships held firm. In one engagement, the USS Campbell detected a surfaced U-boat in near-zero visibility and closed in at full speed, guided entirely by radar. The U-boat, caught off guard, tried to dive, but depth charges exploded within seconds. The once reliable cloak of darkness had vanished. Across the convoy screen, similar encounters unfolded. Escorts were no longer chasing after torpedo wakes or reacting to distress flares. They were intercepting threats before attacks began. The U-boats, scattered by aggressive patrols, failed to coordinate. Night after night, the Wolfpack struggled to close in while radar-equipped ships maintained a relentless watch. Another critical battle occurred soon after, involving convoys SC 130 and HX 237, both heavily supported by Allied air cover. Long-range liberators from Coastal Command, armed with ASV, air-to-surface vessel, radar, patrolled the skies above the convoys. For the Germans, the mid-ocean gap, once a sanctuary beyond aircraft range, was shrinking rapidly. In one instance, a radar-equipped liberator detected a U-boat running on the surface through a thick cloud layer. The German crew, unaware anything was nearby, continued charging batteries until the bomber emerged suddenly, dropping depth charges directly on their position. These encounters were repeated again and again. Radar no longer supplemented tactics, it dictated them. The psychological impact was immediate. German captains reported feeling blind, as if the ocean had turned against them. They described radar-directed attacks that came without warning, often at moments when they believed themselves entirely concealed. Some believed the Allies possessed a new kind of night vision. Others questioned whether their own equipment malfunctioned. None yet understood the full scale of the technological gap. Meanwhile, Allied coordination reached unprecedented levels. Radar operators shared data with bridge officers in real time. Convoy escorts maneuvered with precision, executing intercept courses, layered sweeps, and rapid depth charge patterns. The combination of radar, sonar, HF/DF, and disciplined escort doctrine created a multidimensional defense that left little room for U-boat tactics to succeed. By spring 1943, the wolf packs were no longer hunting. They were surviving. And in the midst of these battles, fought in darkness, fog, and relentless storms, a deeper realization began to take root within the Kriegsmarine. The Allies had achieved something Germany's leadership never fully anticipated. They had made the night transparent. These turning points, scattered across dozens of convoy battles, led directly to the moment that would define the entire Atlantic campaign. A moment when Donitz could no longer deny what the captains were reporting. A moment when a U-boat fleet faced losses it could not sustain. A moment when German confidence finally collided with American radar-driven reality. But then, everything changed with a single order. Late that afternoon, an American officer stepped forward holding a small clipboard. The prisoners braced themselves, expecting new assignments, heavy labor, maybe even punishment for their earlier hesitation. Instead, his words struck them harder than any command they had ever received. "You're not required to work. Your only duty now is to recover." The interpreter repeated it carefully in Japanese, word by word. The women froze. Eyes widened. Some shook their heads without even realizing it, convinced they had misheard. Recover? Rest? Be cared for? To them, this sounded impossible, unbelievable, even dangerous to trust. One elderly prisoner whispered to another, "Is this a trick?" But more proof came immediately. American nurses approached with trays, not with demands, but with food. Real food. Warm steamed rice, soup, bread, even fruit. Items the women had not tasted in months. When one of the prisoners hesitated, a nurse gently smiled and said, "Please eat." The moment the bowl touched her hands, the prisoner broke down in tears. It was the first time in a long, brutal war that someone had spoken to them not as enemies, but as human beings. And in that moment, the entire world they thought they understood collapsed, revealing a reality they never imagined possible. In the days that followed, a quiet transformation began, slow, hesitant, almost fragile at first. The Japanese women, still unsure whether this unexpected kindness was real, moved cautiously around the camp. Some continued waking up before dawn out of habit, ready to perform labor that no longer existed. Others lined up automatically, waiting for orders that never came. But every time, American personnel gently redirected them. "No work today. Rest. Take your time. You're safe now." Bit by bit, the fear began to loosen its grip. For the first time in months, sometimes years, the women experienced something they barely recognized anymore. Stillness. They watched American nurses wash their wounds without anger. They accepted blankets that were handed to them without shouting or threats. Some even allowed themselves to sit in the sunlight, letting warmth replace the cold discipline that had shaped their lives for so long. And slowly, small pieces of humanity returned to them. A faint smile, a shared laugh, a tear wiped away by a stranger's hand. These were tiny things, moments that might seem ordinary to the outside world. But to these prisoners, they felt like fragments of a lost life finally resurfacing. The war hadn't ended yet, but a different kind of battle had already begun. The battle inside their own minds, as they tried to reconcile everything they were taught with everything they were now experiencing. As the days passed, something even more unexpected unfolded. something that neither the prisoners nor their American caretakers anticipated. The Japanese women started to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. They began asking questions, quietly at first, almost timid. Why are you helping us? Are we not your enemies? And every time, the Americans answered with the same calm, steady truth. The war is not here. Here, you're people who need care. Those words, repeated again and again, slowly chipped away at years of wartime conditioning. For some prisoners, the transformation came in a single moment, like when an American nurse brushed dust off a woman's shoulder as gently as if she were her own sister. For others, it took longer, requiring countless small acts of kindness before they allowed themselves to believe any of it. But gradually, trust, real trust, began to form. Women who once avoided eye contact now nodded respectfully to the guards. Those who assumed every gesture carried punishment slowly relaxed their posture. A few even began helping one another more openly, without fear of being reprimanded for weakness. By the end of the week, the camp no longer felt like a place of captivity. It felt astonishingly like a place of recovery, a place where enemies became caretakers and former prisoners rediscovered something they thought war had stolen forever: their sense of dignity. And in quiet moments, when the camp settled into an unusual calm, some of the women allowed themselves a thought they never imagined having. If this is how our enemy treats us, what else have we been wrong about? The shock that began with a simple order, "You are here to rest," had grown into something far deeper. A realization that compassion could survive even the darkest years of war. War is often measured in numbers: ships sunk, miles gained, lives lost. Yet, sometimes its most profound moments are measured in small human gestures that ripple far beyond the battlefield. The story of these Japanese women prisoners and the calm insistence of their American caretakers reminds us that even amidst the machinery of global conflict, compassion can assert itself in ways that no weapon can replicate. What happened in that camp was not a victory of arms, but a quiet victory of humanity. In the middle of one of history's deadliest wars, where the sea was a hunting ground and survival was often determined by stealth, skill, or luck, a simple act, allowing captives to rest, upended everything they thought they knew. The prisoners' disbelief became a mirror reflecting how war shapes perception, hardens expectations, and erodes trust. And yet, when offered something radically different, they slowly began to believe in a reality that defied decades of indoctrination. This event also illustrates a broader truth. Technology, strategy, and brute force may decide the outcomes of battles, but it is human connection that endures. Just as American radar changed the course of the Atlantic War by making the invisible visible, so too did small acts of care transform lives in ways that no record of kills or captures could capture. In both cases, the unseen, whether it is electromagnetic waves or the steady kindness of a stranger, became the agent of change. Ultimately, the story is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, war does not erase humanity entirely. Courage takes many forms: the courage to fight, the courage to innovate, and sometimes the courage simply to show mercy. Those prisoners, once trained to expect cruelty, learned that survival could coexist with dignity, and that compassion could be as transformative as any victory at sea. And in that realization lies the enduring legacy of this story, that history's harshest chapters often reveal not only the cost of conflict, but the boundless capacity of the human heart to endure and, against all odds, to hope.